Kellylysmith.
Thank you.
So EFT1 was a smashing success. It was super awesome. Imagine you've been working on like a class project. Imagine you're back in school and you've been working on a class project, except the class project goes on for like 4 years. And you finally comes time to see if everything you've designed and everything you've analyzed and planned for actually works for the first time. And it was unbelievable. It was an unbelievable feeling. I was so proud and so happy that day. It's definitely the highlight of my career so far. It was awesome. We launched on a Delta IV Heavy rocket. You want to flip forward?
Absolutely.
So this is kind of the EFT-1 or the Exploration Flight Test 1 mission overview. Have you guys received a briefing on this yet?
No.
Okay. So what we did is we launched Orion, this tiny little black capsule up there. We stacked it on top of a Delta IV Heavy rocket out at Kennedy Space Center, and we launched it from Florida, and we did 2 laps around the Earth, or 2 revolutions or 2 orbits. The first one was pretty close to the Earth. I was just making sure everything was, working properly. That was the initial parking orbit. After we finished the first lap around the Earth, the rocket reignited its engine, this upper stage engine right here. And it's kind of like the roller coaster, where it just starts kind of carrying you up the hill. That's where we're basically just giving it a whole lot of speed and energy, and it blasted it way out high to its highest point above Earth, called the apogee. It was about 3,600 miles above Earth, which is pretty high out. It's the highest human-rated spacecraft has ever flown since the Apollo era. Once we were way out that high, we separated Orion from the upper stage, and then they separated right here, and then it came in and performed a little burn, and then got ready to come and slam into the atmosphere at 20,000 miles per hour. When it hit the atmosphere, the heat shield heated up to, I think it was 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit was my recollection. It was unbelievable. The best part of the entire mission for me, I'd been working on the engineering design team, working on the guidance, navigation, and control systems for it. And I was also a member of the flight control team, so I had kind of a dual role there, so I was pretty unique in that respect. It was a huge privilege to be able to see the streaming video coming down off the vehicle. I mean, we had done, I don't know how many simulations, dozens of simulations, and we had simulated all sorts of failures. Okay, what happens if this set of jets doesn't work? What happens if our batteries go out? What happens if all these things? Nothing prepared me for the views that were coming down off the spacecraft. It was unbelievable. I don't know if you guys saw any of the video footage, but you could see the Earth looking out the window. It was unbelievable. Go ahead.
I'm just wondering, it heated up to 4,000 degrees. Is that the same temperature as the shuttle when it would re-enter, or is that a lot hotter?
I think it's hotter, though I'm not
Yeah.
It is hotter? Okay.
I thought so.
So we use it's a different body shape, and so the aerodynamics are different, and the materials that we use for our heat shield are different.
I think the drag would be greater, maybe.
Well, the farther you go, the faster you come back, and the hotter it gets.
Okay.
Yeah.
More friction.
So we use some of the same heat shield on like the sides of Orion, the tiles that you remember from the shuttle days. Those were on the sides, but we use a different one on the bottom because it needs to be stronger.
Yeah,
Is it the same heat shield that was used for Curiosity?
No.
Okay.
Curiosity, I believe, used pica. I believe is the material that was used, or phenolic impregnated carbon later. And Orion used Avcoat, which is I can't remember the acronym offhand.
It's not an acronym. It's just
Oh, it's, okay.
Yeah.
It's just
Good to know. So so Avcoat is an ablator, and so basically as it heats up, it basically vaporizes, it melts and vaporizes, and it carries all of that heat away from it, and as it gets blasted out of the way from Orion, and it carries the heat away so the heat doesn't get imparted and soaked back into the vehicle. So it's how you keep the spacecraft cool. So we hit the atmosphere going 20,000 miles an hour. And a few seconds after we hit the atmosphere, we got the telemetry coming down from the vehicle. That's the data that it's beaming back to us in real time. And it was fantastic. We saw the guidance system properly engaged, and it started doing its thing, and then no more data. We didn't get any data for about 70 seconds or so. Some of the longest 70 seconds of my life. That's when it's doing like a lot of the really tricky stuff to make sure it doesn't over G itself. It doesn't burn up. It doesn't skip and go way too long. So when it came out of the radio blackout or the plasma blackout, we had models predicting where we thought it was going to be based on the mission on the day of. And it was so exciting. When it came out of blackout, we got data back. Boom, it was right on the line. So it was really a testament to how well the engineering team did their job and designed all the models in our simulators. It was an awesome day. And it was awesome seeing the 2 drogue parachutes come out, properly inflate, and then we rode on those from 24,000 feet down to about 6,500 feet altitude, and then the main parachutes came out. The main parachutes are those big striped orange and white ones. They're enormous. Every time a parachute opening occurs, an engineer holds their breath because it's so scary to make sure that the parachute actually works. Parachutes are notoriously tricky. Just talk to the Mars guys. They are terrified of parachutes. And so we landed, and it was awesome. It was definitely one of the highlights of my career. After that, we had my wife and I had just had a baby about a month prior to the flight, so I hadn't really taken much time off in preparation for the mission. So after the mission was done, stuck around for about a week to help with post-flight and initial reporting and stuff, and I peaced out for vacation. I had taken vacation about 1.5 years. So it was fantastic to be able to get some time off, spend time with my family. Since EFT-1, we've learned a lot of really great things about the spacecraft. We've been able to measure the response of the heat shield during reentry. So the goal of EFT-1 was to verify basically our aerodynamics models that we have in our simulations, to verify the thermal response of the material that we used, and to make sure our manufacturing techniques worked well for the heat shield. And so that was 2 of the really big objectives. Some of the other objectives were to verify the performance of the guidance, navigation, and control system, which is what I worked on. GNC, or guidance, navigation, and control, is like the autopilot. Basically, Orion flies itself completely automatically. We don't do anything on the ground. We do all the work ahead of time to teach it how to fly, basically, and it flies completely by itself. So it's a test of that, and as well as all the parachutes and the pyrotechnic mechanisms to explosively fire things and to cut things and do things like that. It was a great success. I mean, virtually flawless the entire flight. Since EFT-1, we've started, well, even before EFT-1, we've been working on the next Orion mission called Exploration Mission 1. Next slide, please. Before we jump into that, here's EFT-1 on the launch pad on December 5th in the morning. I was up in the Mission Control Center bright and early at 3 a.m. Pretty awesome. We launched at about 7:05, and we were done by 11:30, I think, was the splashdown time. And so it's kind of weird being done with your day and being exhausted, and it's noon. Next slide. This is kind of an artist's rendering of what reentry looked like. There's actually an awesome video that we got of looking out the docking window out the top of Orion. You can see this nasty purple-green plasma trail trailing behind us. It's really awesome. You should definitely go on YouTube and check it
I
out.
think we'll see that when we go to Building 9.
Okay, awesome.
You may have seen some of it yesterday when we were.
Next. And here it is after splashdown with its big inflatable uprighting system, and there's the recovery ship off in the distance after it sailed up. Here's some Navy frogmen swimmers helping to stabilize the spacecraft.
That was playing yesterday at that media
Right.
event. Yeah.
Next slide. So Exploration Mission 1 is what's coming next. We started work on it even before Orion flew for EFT-1. Exploration Mission 1 is a mission to send Orion on the new rocket called the Space Launch System around the moon and back. The idea is we're going to launch it the current plan is around late 2018. Orion is going to be, this is an upgraded Orion. It's going to have life support systems and a lot of new features. So you can kind of think of EFT-1 Orion as basically version 0.1, and EM-1, or Exploration Mission 1 Orion, is basically version 1.0, or Block 1 Orion. Orion is going to be mated to a new service module currently being designed by the European Space Agency. We call it the ESM, or the European Service Module. That contains the rocket fuel, has the rocket engine here. You can see the bell here, the auxiliary thrusters, RCS system. It generates power for the entire spacecraft with solar panels kind of in the X-Wing Star Wars thing. Kind of cool.
No land on moon?
What was that?
No landing on the moon?
We're not landing on the moon with this mission. So what we're doing is we are going to launch out. No people are going to be on board. This is basically the final shakeout test for Orion.
Yeah.
And it's going to be the first flight of the Space Launch System. What we're going to do is we're going to send it out to the moon into what's called a distant retrograde orbit, which is engineer nerd speak for you're going to be flying way around the moon backwards. So normally an orbit goes, if you're looking top down, you'd be going counterclockwise. We're going to be entering and going clockwise. So that's what retrograde means. Distant means we're going to be orbiting at an altitude of around 70,000 kilometers. At that distance, the moon's gravity is not the completely dominating force anymore. There's effects of Earth's gravity as well. So it's kind of a goofy orbit. It's called a three-body orbit. So it gets affected significantly by both Earth's gravity and the moon's gravity. For that reason, it happens to be extremely stable. For that reason, it's being considered for a potential candidate location for bringing an asteroid back from way out yonder and putting it into this DRO, or this distant retrograde orbit. Something can stay in that orbit for hundreds and hundreds of years without requiring any station keeping whatsoever. So it's a very safe place to bring a small asteroid back, or a boulder. It would be really bad if we brought like an asteroid back and then, oops, 100 years later, bombed Earth or something. So that's not good. So the DRO is a really good candidate opportunity, or a good candidate location for an asteroid. A DRO is also a really great place for a staging ground for assembling an interplanetary spacecraft. So if we were going to assemble an interplanetary transfer vehicle to go from the Earth-Moon system out to Mars, the DRO is a great location because it has pretty low delta V cost to enter and to depart. Delta V, sorry, that's my engineer nerds speak coming out. Delta V is the change in velocity required to enter or to depart an orbit. It's how you basically kind of kick the spacecraft. So you can kind of think of it like a billiards table or a pool table. Just give it a little pop and it changes the orbit a little bit. We're going to be doing a lot of brand new things on EM1 that we did not do on EFT1, because this is kind of like the souped up version of Orion. We're going to be doing autonomous optical navigation. No one has ever done this before on board a spacecraft. Are you guys familiar with the New Horizons mission? They just went out to Pluto and saw Charon, and oh gosh, it's awesome, totally awesome. When they got close, you know, they keep track of the spacecraft's position from radars on the ground through the Deep Space Network. But they can't get super accurate at those huge distances. So what they started doing instead is, as they approach Pluto, they start taking pictures of Pluto in the distance and doing star sightings and things like that. And they can kind of recalibrate themselves and figure out where they really are with respect to Pluto. What they're doing is taking pictures of the moon, or taking pictures of Pluto, and sending it back down to Earth. On Earth, they do all the optical image processing stuff, figure out where it's at, and then send the solution back to the spacecraft. What we're doing is doing the entire thing, figuring out where it is, taking the pictures, processing it completely on board. That requires a significant leap forward in terms of technology. We're also going to be doing autonomous onboard mission planning. For instance, the space shuttle or the Orion capsule, basically all the maneuver plans were computed on the ground. Say, if you want to do this mission, you need to do a burn here and this much, you know, with these times and things like that. What we have on Orion is a new capability called the two-level targeter, which enables us to basically replan the entire trajectory and the entire mission from launch to landing every single time we do a maneuver. And so we're constantly replanning on board. What we're effectively doing is we're trying to sever the link of dependence of Orion from the ground. That is what enables you to go on to Mars, is to have that level of autonomy from the ground, to be able to make those decisions and to gather the information and plan the trajectory to go all the way out there. That becomes more important the further away you get from Earth, where time delay starts becoming a big issue. So what this is really about is increasing the amount of autonomy that we put on board the Orion spacecraft. And then my personal favorite, because this is what I work on, is autonomous skip entry. So do you guys remember, do you guys all see Apollo 13?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a very dramatic scene at the where they're having to manually fire the engines to try to hit the moon or hit the Earth. And if they come in too steep, they're going to burn up. If they come in too shallow, they're going to skip out and be gone forever, basically. So they have a very small window to correctly, for angles to enter into the atmosphere. We have the exact same problem for Orion. However, what we're doing is quite a bit more advanced than what Apollo was able to do. We're going to actually be performing an intentional skip entry. So think of it just like when you go to a pond, you find a nice smooth rock, and you can skip it off the surface of the pond, and it does a bounce and comes back in, or if you're really good, you can get it bounce a few times. What we're going to be doing is basically doing the same thing with a spaceship. Coming in at 36,250 feet per second, more or less, and we're going to be coming in blazing hot, and Orion, although it just looks kind of like an iron gumdrop, you know, you can think of it. It actually flies like an airplane glider. What we do is we intentionally offset the center of gravity so it flies crooked in the atmosphere. We intentionally do this. The reason is, if it's crooked, it generates a little bit of lift. So if you're pointing to the side, it starts pulling to the right, or if you rotate it the other way, it pulls back to the left, kind of like a glider. So we can do that to control how far deeply into the atmosphere Orion enters. That in turn slows it down more. Then we can control how far it ends up flying. So what we can do with Orion is fly this big, iron gumdrop, like kind of like a sports car. We fly through the atmosphere, kind of like a snowboarder going down a hill, carving into the atmosphere and skidding. And then we correctly target our exit to leave the atmosphere, skip out back into space, and come back down and land off the coast of California. Our requirement is to hit the target to within 5.4 nautical miles of air. We do quite a bit better than that in our testing, in our design. So this is something that was never done on Apollo. The only people who have attempted this, I believe, are the Russians did it once back in the 60s, I think. I don't think that was a success. And the Chinese recently did it with a very, very small, it's like a washing machine sized satellite coming back from the moon. I believe that was a success, but it's tough to get details on it. But this is going to be the first time we've done it with like a human-rated spacecraft. So I'm pretty excited about that. That's what I worked on. So I work on Orion, so I know a lot more about it. Next slide. There's this big other thing that I don't work on called the Space Launch System. You guys have probably heard of it. You probably know about as much as I do about it. The Space Launch System is going to be the most powerful rocket ever designed. It's going to dwarf everything else. It's going to be more powerful and bigger than the Saturn V rocket that you guys see when you drive in on site. It's going to be, I think the base version is 370 feet, 60, 70? Okay, it's huge. It has these solid, this is the Block 1 version, has these solid rocket boosters. They're 5-segment boosters. They're derived from the shuttle solid rocket boosters, which were 4-segment boosters. They're using spatial domain engines down here, RS-25s. And for EM1, the first time we're flying it, we're going to be using a Delta IV upper stage that's been modified slightly, called the Interim Cryogenic Propulsion Stage, or the ICPS. That's right up here. That is going to be the thing that kicks us out to the moon. This first part launches us into orbit. This part kicks us off to the moon. And then here's Orion with its launch abort system. That's this little pointy thing on top. That rocket, incidentally, is more powerful than that Redstone rocket that you guys saw when you came in this morning. You guys see that one that's sitting out there by the Saturn V building? It's got that red little tower on top. That little itty-bitty solid rocket on top is more powerful than that Mercury Redstone. Wow. So this thing is going to be a beast. You need a heavy lift vehicle like this to be able to sustain a kind of Earth to Mars strategy. Next slide. So that kind of shows you here. If you really want to get serious about going to Mars, you need to have something that's a heavy lift vehicle so you don't have to do as many launches. You can put more things on a single vehicle. So you can use this SLS to launch either science payloads into deep space. You can use it to launch Orion and habitation modules and things like that. You can do interplanetary vehicle construction out in deep space, and this is all basically made possible by kind of a common launching platform, the SLS. Part of the idea of going to Mars is not necessarily, we're doing it in stages. Just like how Apollo did it, Apollo didn't just go to the moon in one mission, right? They tested out technology piece by piece, and they built up in a logical, controlled fashion to make sure they had sufficiently matured technology once they went. The same idea is true for Orion. So Orion is currently being designed as kind of the space taxi. So Orion is kind of the common first building block that has to work properly to get the crew off of the Earth and out to an interplanetary transfer vehicle. Once it's out there, once we have this interplanetary transfer vehicle, that leaves from the vicinity of the Earth-Moon system, and it goes out to the Mars system. At Mars, they have 2 moons, Phobos and Deimos. They're very low gravity environment things, or moons, so it's very easy to kind of get up real close to those moons without having to use a whole lot of rocket fuel to slow yourself down. Some of the ideas that are currently under consideration are to basically have the crew on Phobos and Deimos operating robots on the surface of Mars. The idea is they are so much closer to Mars, they don't have the kind of the penalty of the speed of light limitations to communicate with those robots. They don't have the latency that we do here on Earth. And as you know, we currently have a whole fleet of orbiters and rovers on the surface, Curiosity being the most prominent one that you guys probably remember as the rover. But we're going to be launching 2 more rovers in the next 5 years. One is launching next year? Yeah, 2016, called InSight. And it's very much like the Phoenix lander, if you recall that one from 2008. That one's going to be landing at an equatorial landing site. It doesn't have wheels or anything. It's just going to come down, and I think it's placing some seismometers to measure like Mars quakes, I guess is the word. So it's going to be doing some science there. I'm working personally on the next Mars mission called Mars 2020. Guess when we're launching? The idea is we would launch in 2020, and we'd be landing around Valentine's Day 2021. So, sorry, Claire, if you're listening somewhere.
Land when, I'm sorry?
Around Valentine's Day in 2021. So the idea is we want to take the Curiosity rover and basically replace all the science instruments on the inside of it, put in new scientific payloads, and but try to keep everything as similar and as common as possible. That keeps costs down. It keeps our heritage high, so we know we still have good reliability in our systems, and it's kind of part of the proven architecture for going to Mars. One of the big ideas with this Mars 2020 rover is to basically create a bunch of caches, to cache samples, interesting bits of material or whatever, and then have them ready to be picked up by a later mission. And then that later mission would come down, land on Mars, grab those samples, get back into orbit, and then a third mission meets up with those samples in Mars orbit and kicks them back to Earth. So it's kind of the current idea is to do a 3-stage Mars sample return mission campaign. That's one of the far-ranging plans managed by the Jet Propulsion Laboratory out in California. But I have kind of a unique vantage point being able to straddle both the human spaceflight side as well as the Mars robotic exploration. I get to see what they're doing with their mission planning, what are the challenges of Mars that we don't have here on Earth, and kind of applying the lessons that we have from Earth to Mars and from Mars back to Earth. With that, I'll start taking questions. How are we doing on